everyone. Welcome to this LinkedIn Live presentation of software that is designed to make discovery driven planning easier to teach in the classroom. I'm Rita McGrath, and I was a co author on the original discovery driven planning article way back in the 90s. And it's been a perennial frustration of mine that, I teach this stuff, people get the idea, and then they try to actually put it to work in real life. And it's like, is it a spreadsheet? Is it a, like, how do I do this for real? And so something I've been working on actually for quite a while now is this is its first public debut, is software that's designed to make it really easy. And you'll see the corporate application, of course. But for today, what we're going to hone in on is the application for classroom use when you want to teach this stuff to either graduate students or executives or people that are interested in learning about discovery driven planning. The way this will go is I'll give a brief overview of the method, where it came from, how it's used. Then I'll show you the actual software, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. So with me today is Jacora Kaiser, who's our customer success lead at Belize, which is the company that actually operates this software, as well as Ron Boer, who is my partner at Belize. And he provides sort of grounding in reality for when I go off too far on a theoretical track. So the purpose behind discovery driven growth, the methodology, is really to recognize that for a lot of companies, they realize innovation is really important. And this applies, to people in executive education as well as people in regular companies. They realize innovation is terribly important, but what they find is that it actually gets swamped by the pressures of the day business. So, you've got this little innovation mouse just kind of overwhelmed by the pressure of what goes on day to day. And one of the big reasons that happens is that innovation is seen as unpredictable, undisciplined, like it can't meet targets, it can't meet deadlines, it's unpredictable. And that is a real barrier to being able to operate effectively. And so the first observation I would make is that you need to balance the past and the future when you're thinking about your innovation program. So when you're doing something that's really predictable, college textbooks, right? You can kind of calculate how many students there are and how many professors have assigned these textbooks, and you pretty much know year to year what your sales are likely to be. You can use all your standard methods that we teach, in the classroom, in a situation like that. As you push out into uncertainty, as you're in the world of entrepreneurship or venturing or growth, the value that you're creating is more and more the value of options. Where a strategic option is a small bet that you're making today that buys you the right, but not the obligation to make a bigger investment down the road. And in our classrooms, when we teach entrepreneurship, right, we're always teaching that, right? How much are you willing to risk to guarantee a substantial upside? What can you afford to bear to validate whether something is true or not? And those of you that have taught discovery driven growth or taught the lean startup, what's your minimum viable product? How do you get product market fit? How do you judge these? These are all considerations having to do with option value. And I don't know, Ron, if you want to make any comments about why people find this so tough.
Yeah, I mean, I think the experience in the real world is that it's a lot easier to get your arms around, things that you can quantify, right? So I have a product today, and I know how that product's going to perform. The other thing that the mistake that we see people frequently make is trying to put traditional metrics on options, right? So what's the ROI going to be, and what's the net present value of this project? And basically, you're buying an option, and managing a portfolio of options here. So the traditional metrics don't necessarily work.
Exactly. And so that brings me to the way that we think about options in the context of a comprehensive portfolio of choices. And so the way that I organize it is we have market uncertainty across the bottom. So uncertainty about who's going to buy this thing and what will they pay and how will we get to them. And up the left, we've got technological uncertainty. And what you'll find for your students is they need to understand that different kinds of investments, different kinds of projects have different implications for how they're managed. So projects in the core enhancement space, which are probably not the ones you're going to be using in your classroom, are they make your core business better. And but that's not really what we're looking at here. What we're looking at are the other areas in the portfolio. So platform kinds of investments are the big, challenging investments that an organization might need to make, which promise its future. They're candidates to be the future core. And you can't do too many of them, and you can't do a lot of them at the same time because they require commitment. Amazon Web Services can't say, well, I'd love you to sign up for my platform. Well, are you going to be here in a year and a half? Oh, I don't know. So those are big and demanding. Now, out here in the space of options is probably what's going to feature most prominently in the classroom. So, a positioning option is something where you know there's a demand, but you don't know what the solution to that demand is going to be. So, a great example would be what comes after Zoom? Is it going to be telepresence, teleportation, haptic? I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows. But what we need to do is place some bets in that space. So, that's what you would do there. A scouting option is a case where you've got something that you know how to operate, but you haven't kind of figured out what the market implications are. So, who's going to buy it in what quantity? How do we get into the market? The last and most significant in terms of uncertainty are what we call stepping stones. So, a stepping stone is an investment, which is typically a small investment that you're making into a market that's very uncertain, right? I don't know how to make it, and I don't know if anybody wants it, but I think the long run opportunity is irresistible. And autonomous cars would be a great example there, right? Everybody's running around $100 billion spent on autonomous cars. And yet, a lot of that's going to be wasted money because what we want to do is find these small early markets where somebody has a problem that our tech can solve. And we see applications in the military, we see applications in mining. That's the idea. So here's the thing, that when you look at a corporate portfolio, the question is, well, how many of what kind of thing should you have in your mix? And what we find all too often is it's a mess, right? And this is an actual example from a portfolio for a medical device manufacturer. And what you see is, right, way too much stuff. Things are not organized. Things are not well structured. And to do this whole portfolio was going to take them 4 years. So the portfolio was out of whack with the rest. So the first big lesson when I teach this portfolio theory is we need some way an organization of bringing into alignment your strategy, which when it's done right is pulling you into the future, your budgets, which unfortunately are often anchoring you in the past, your project approval process and governance process, which is often completely disconnected from strategy or budgets, and finally, the process by which people feel that they're going to be rewarded. So that's one big application for this software that can help bring these things back into alignment. So for those of you, particularly in executive education, this is a huge issue that comes up in my classroom all the time. Dropping to the level of an individual project, let's look at how the software addresses the key principles behind discovery-driven planning. And discovery-driven planning had its origins in a series of studies I did of corporate flops. These were seemingly smart companies that got themselves into terrible trouble when they tried to get into new areas. And Disney Europe was a big example, but this hasn't stopped happening. Quibi, $2 billion to figure out if millennials want to watch 10-minute movies, and it turns out the answer was no. And it keeps happening. We have DrinkWorks, we have Zillow offers, and. And the reason why this keeps happening, and this is really the core value added of discovery driven planning, is that when you look at the ventures that failed, what you find is a very common pattern: untested assumptions taken as facts, very few opportunities for low commitment testing, leaders personally committed to the expression of the idea, no plan B, right? No opportunity to pivot, which is the popular way that gets talked about. In other words, they're being planned as though we had this rich experience to draw on. And I've argued for decades now, there's a better way. There's a better way to do this. And the better way is really to plan to learn, but at lowest possible cost. So what's the structure? So the first structure is define success before you start. And I define that as what's the upside that this thing could achieve, right? It honors this principle of options. If you were wildly successful, how good could it be? Not how good do I project it's going to be, but what's the upside there? Then we want to look at, are we being realistic about markets and competition? As we're doing that, we want to think about a document we call the deliverable specification. How does this thing actually have to operate? You're going to document your assumptions, and we'll show you how the software tracks these. And finally, and most significantly, instead of planning this big, huge spreadsheet, 18 months out, we're going to plan, but with a lot of discipline to the next checkpoint that we're having. So you define success, you define your unit of activity. That allows you to now work backward into, well, is this actually going to deliver the business? And that requires defining your unit of business, your key metrics, and the software is going to help you really structure that. So if you go all the way back to 1984 and Michael Dell in his dorm room, the innovation he came up with was, instead of making a thing and hoping somebody buys it, why don't we get orders in and then we'll build what that, right? I mean, that was the simple innovation that created the $100 billion behemoth that is Bell today. But it was a very simple idea when he started. So that we use with something we call a reverse or upside down income statement that comes with the software. And you want to really be testing all along whether these things are reasonable or not. So I'll give you a real world example of a seminar that I ran. So it was a teaching case. It was for a chemical company, and they were bringing together all of their venture leaders. And the venture leaders were all supposed to, be working on something new. And the organizer says to me, "Well, can I can I give you one of our cases to track for the business?" And I said, "Sure. Send me the case. I do this all the time." So the case was a case that this chemical company was going to forward integrate into the apparel business. Now, I don't know about you, but if it were up to me, that would not be my first choice of a sector to go into if I was in the chemical business. But that was their business. So I sent a bunch of our MBAs off to the library, and I had them do a rough addressable market analysis. And it turns out, when I look at the plan and I look at the market, like how many articles of clothing are sold in a department store in a year, it turns out that by year 5, and it was right there in black and white in the spreadsheet at the back of the business plan, they would have to sell 1 out of every 5 garments sold in a department store every year. And obviously, this wasn't realistic. And the point about discovery driven planning is you can find those kinds of anomalies very quickly when you do this with discipline. So the idea is really to support iterative, kind of let's iterate, let's learn. It really supports the learning process. And what you want to teach students is there's a way of doing this that combines little bets with financial reality. Because what you want to be doing over time is reducing the uncertainty. Now, if you have the kind of classroom where students are actually bringing real businesses, so they're either working on a real business, or they're working on a team, or maybe they're consulting with corporate partners, this is just a perfect way of bringing all this together. So that's some information about me. You can watch this on the replay. And I don't know, Ron and Jacora, if you want to make any observations about things we should know.
Well, I think, the most important thing that I've learned from Discovery Driven Growth is the transparency, right? So, in the corporate world, it's very common to, someone's got a great idea and it's a moonshot, and, you approve the moonshot and you fund it. And the next thing you see is the 90 days later, 180 days later, a year later, somebody comes back and gives you an update on their moonshot, which has suddenly become a trip to Mars. And, you haven't seen all the changes and the problems and et cetera. And what Discovery Driven Growth gives you is the ability to run a lot of moonshots without the price of moonshots and with the extremely high level of transparency. And that's what I love about the software, because anybody can log in and see where you are.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at the software. So the software itself, it's called Spark Hub. And this particular version is designed for educators, so it's called Spark Hub EDU. And imagine that you have a classroom and you've either got individual students doing individual projects, or maybe you have student teams doing projects. The first thing that this will do is it allows you to lay out all the student projects in one view. So you, as the faculty member, can see kind of how your classroom is evolving over the course of a semester, or if it's an executive education program, over the course of a shorter period of time. Or maybe it's an immersion program and you watch this thing over a year. Maybe you've got an incubator or an amplifier. But in any case, it gives you an instant snapshot of this where your portfolio is right now. Each of these bubbles represents a project of some kind. The yellow ones are projects that are designed to be sold to an external party. The green ones are more that are like internal projects, so in process improvement projects or whatever. As a professor, you can take snapshots. So if you want it to look right at the beginning of your class, like what did it look like then? That might be where you started, and then you can sort of see how you're making progress. How are your students coming along? You can then see the current view, and to take a snapshot, it's really easy. You just click on the snapshot button, and boom, it says okay. As of whatever time it is, we've got a snapshot that we can take. You can look at the portfolio. This is all the bubbles the same size, but you can look at them by opportunity size. So it's pretty clear some of your students are a little more ambitious than others. You can also look at them by strategic score. Now, the strategic score is something that you, as the faculty member, actually set up. And you do that in this part of the system where you specify exactly what you want the students to be thinking about as they are thinking about their projects. So this is also a complement to teaching, right? Because you can say, here's things that any venture should be able to figure out, should be able to address, right? So is the problem widespread enough? Does our team understand the market? Is the solution scalable? And I'm not saying every project has to meet every one of these, but if you've got a particular kind of course, for example, so let's say it's a program just about platform business models, you could put in specific strategic scores about platform business models, and it's a way of reinforcing your students' learning. So that's all there. So if I pick a project, you can see that the first thing I would want to look at is, okay, how did the students set it up? And as I said, the students only have access to their own projects or the projects that they're working as a team on. So this is a project, it's an artificial diamond carbon capture project. It's externally focused. They think it's a 1.2 trillion dollar or billion dollar opportunity. Why did they think that? We'll get into that in just a minute. Here's a description of the project. Now here's the option value, right? It's a $1.2 billion opportunity. I'm willing to allocate $300,000 to sort, to figure it out. And so that's how the students would set it up. The placement on the portfolio comes from their answers to questions about uncertainty. And these questions come from my research on what causes ventures to flop, what causes them to go wrong. And it's because there are these really important uncertainties we haven't resolved. So when we first set a project up, we make sure that everything is scored highly uncertain, right? In the beginning. So when in the beginning of your course, you score everything highly uncertain. Now, if your students want to change the score, so they want to go from highly uncertain to highly certain, what I suggest is that you require them to put in a comment. And now what you can see is the quality of their thinking, right? So this particular comment says the size of the global diamond market today is 2.3 billion. We think our addressable market is half of that, so 1.2 billion. And then they give some references to an article and evidence. Now, I'm not saying this is a fact yet, but they're at least giving you the encouragement that you can see the quality of their thinking, and you don't have to have them submit papers. You don't have to do anything. It's a living document almost. And you can see the comments throughout the plan, right? And, getting Oprah to say this is a great thing, well, that's documentable. And this student team did, in fact, document that. So you can see how easy it is to get that. And then the heart and soul of all this is what I call checkpoints. And as I mentioned, a checkpoint is a moment in time at which you're going to learn something. So this particular hypothetical has pre-populated a series of checkpoints, so customer interviews, competitor assessment, prototypes, and so forth. What the student teams can do for the checkpoints that are assigned to them is they can say what their assumption is. The value of the jewelry this will create, additional benefit carbon capture feature. And depending on how you set your class up, right, you can give them a hypothetical budget, right? Or if it's a real project, obviously they'd have a real budget to work with. You can also put in a target completion date. And if it was part of, say, an assignment series, they could put in the completion date. We're going to put the note, right? Why did I complete it? And put in whatever you thought. You can change that, but you're capturing why they thought the what they thought. And you can also give students a budget. So let's say this particular student team, we know they have $300,000 to play with. Let's give them $20,000 to play with for this checkpoint, and they can say that's now in progress. And you can actually capture their notes. Now, if you open up this checkpoint, you'll see that the assumptions we just put in are there. They're captured now. We also allow your students to link to a document repository. So let's say that they've done their initial customer checkpoints, and what you want to know is what were the checkpoint transcripts. You specify where you want them to store those documents, and it takes you automatically there. So what this all does is it allows you to capture the student's progress, monitor their checkpoints, create transparency about how much uncertainty they're dealing with. It also allows you, if you're in like earlier in the process, if you just want to capture ideas, it also lets you capture an inventory of ideas, and you can interrogate those by a number of different things. So you can look at it by keyword. So if I want to see the things that are viewer, like anything with viewer in it comes up. I can sort the ideas by newest first. I can sort them by strategic score. I can sort them by idea name. So there's a number of different ways to sort the ideas. And if I decide that I really want to move, or the student team decides that they really want to move from an idea to actually this portfolio model. So let's say you've done a couple of ideas about a couple of sessions on brainstorming, and they've now got to pick the idea that they're going to work on for the term, and they want to do that. They just click here, and that will convert it to an opportunity, at which point this will go here on the main page for the classroom. So that's it in a nutshell. And I think now we can maybe open it up for conversation.
So obviously, what I think, I mean, what's powerful here is the transparency, right? And the right behind that, I think it's teaching people to work within a budget. So we know that scarcity drives innovation, and the idea that you have to work within a tight budget is really one of the more important aspects of this process. And I'll give you an example. So I do a little bit of angel work, and one of the projects I'm still working on, actually, the person who's the founder came to me and said, "Well, we can launch a MVP in this space, and it's only going to be $1 million." And I said, "Well, how about we only do $10,000? How would we do that?" And he read the book, and we got him on the software, and we now have a much more reasonable, $20,000 or $30,000 startup process where we're going to test the idea, put it in front of customers. Instead of building a website from scratch, we've bought a simple platform that was developed overseas, and will effectively do 90% of what we have to do. But if someone had just handed him $1 million, he would have spent $1 million, and the learning would have been the same, whether you spend $1 million and learn it works or doesn't work, or spend 20,000 and learn that it works or doesn't work. The learning is the same. So to me, that's what is really critical here.
Mm-hmm.
And what I also love is the fact that this is going into into universities and into business schools. When you Google discovery-driven growth, you get hundreds of thousands of hits, and when you Google it in quotation marks, you get tens and tens of thousands of hits. And those are all universities and schools that are actually using the process today, but they're doing it on paper, or they're using little pieces of it. This is the full Monty of discovery-driven growth in a way that everybody can see it really develop, which I love.
So Andrew's mentioning that Andrew Maxwell, that it's important to map all the assumptions and then check them, and we do that a couple of different ways, right? So the uncertainty scoring is those are set. Those come from my research, and so those you can't change, but the checkpoints you can change, and the assumptions are completely flexible. So you can put in any number of assumptions, and as the instructor, right, what you can monitor now is the student's diligence in testing their assumptions creatively and at lowest possible cost. I think you also mentioned that you were in an engineering school, which is great. The challenge that we have with the engineers, though, is they tend to go for the cool features, and they tend to be rather light on the market validation. That's what I found with my engineering students repeatedly. That they really love this is a cool new thing. Take autonomous cars, right? It's a total engineering driven kind of thing for the time being. But hopefully down the road we'll start to see more product market fit, and we'll start to get assumptions about things like who's going to own these things, who's going to take the risk, who's going to make the decision when everybody wants to get picked up at 8 o'clock in the morning. So those are the kinds of assumptions we want to really help people work through. Um, so Michael Samus wants to know if we teach the value of information. Um, Yes, yeah, we do get into that. That would be more of the teaching thing, but the technology, the software supports that idea of the value of information. So, a classic way that we would deal with that would be, let's say somebody had an assumption about how something would work. They go out and do a market test, and their assumption is not borne out, right? But they've learned something. So, let's say I had allocated, I don't know, $10,000 to figure out whether it should be blue or gray, the thing, and I do a test, it costs me $500, and people hate the thing that's gray. They think, "Oh, gray, no, no, no." Well, I've just saved myself $9,500 on a fruitless effort that won't go anywhere. So the value of information really is dead ends we can drop off, paths we no longer need to pursue. Because one thing we know about innovation and entrepreneurship is it's a long odds game. You're making a huge number of bets to get one or two things that are going to work out. So what you want is to be able to disqualify as quickly as possible. Um, and so that's how we deal with the value of information. So Andrew, I'm totally with you. Big companies like to track too many metrics and the wrong metrics, right? They're looking at metrics that are suitable for something that's downstream when you're just trying to figure out something very, very early on.
And it's not uncommon for them to, even though they're not rich, even though they're rich, feel poor. And Rita and I were involved with a global pharmaceutical company recently, and we had dinner with all the executives the night before, and they were talking about how tough it was to, get funding and, get, corporate investment in whatever projects they were running. And we started the session the next day, and I said, you know what the biggest problem you guys have? And they all kind of looked around, and some of them might have even said they were poor, and I said, well, you're rich. You and most of them almost fell out of their chair. But fundamentally, if you're part of a 30 some odd $1 billion pharmaceutical company, you're probably pretty wealthy, and you probably have a bigger innovation budget than you know what to do with. You just aren't implementing it properly. So, so just another example on the other end. So you can use the concept in the startup phase, but it's probably financially a much bigger return than some large corporations, where it's not unusual to speak in millions. I remember when I first started in the corporate world, calling my mother and saying they communicate in a very strange way, and she said, "What's that?" I said, "Everything's in millions." So when they say 10, they mean 10 million, not $10. This is very odd, but that's still true in corporate in corporate America and corporations around the world. It's like, I only have $20 million to work on this, so how can I possibly get it done? Well,
Mm-hmm.
you probably don't need 20 million.
No. So we're super excited about this. I've been giving it some test runs in classes that I teach, and what the students have found is that they really like it as a tool for collaboration, as a tool for sort of structuring how they're thinking about their ventures, and as a way of making it very transparent what uncertainties are we working on, what's the sequencing of them, can we take the easy and cheap things to test first, right? Or in some cases what we advise them to do is test the very hardest thing first, like test the thing that could be a fatal flaw in your venture if you don't get that right. So it provides a level of transparency and a level of structure that we have not seen before in the classroom. So I've been looking to do this for years. People have asked me forever, is there software that I could use to do discovery driven planning? And the roadblock to me has always been what they're thinking of is a plan, like here's how many units we're going to sell and here's what the outcome's going to be, like a business plan. And I think that's the wrong way to go about it, because what this does is it shows you the quality of the thinking. And then, of course, there'll probably be a business plan somewhere along the road. But every discovery driven plan by definition is unique. So you can't just put a cookie cutter template together. So this is something quite different. I'd love to take more questions. We're live even as we speak. So if there are more questions that you have, let us know. Mechanically, what we envision is this will be set up something like the way a textbook is set up. So, as the professor, you would identify your course. We'd give you access to the higher level security features of the system. The students can just pay via credit card. We're thinking of pricing access to it per course, sort of along the lines of a textbook. So, kind of in $90 to $100 range. And for that, the students would have access for the course, and we're considering letting them have access for 9 months or a year, just because if they want to continue to use it, I think that we want to support their learning. And then you would be able to get a code and give the code to your students. They can all sign up as students, and that'll unlock the program functionality for them. And they can either use these to work on a case. They can use these to work on a real business. They can use these to work on a student project, and so it's very flexible. So Ian, comment: big radical long range ideas, one that cannot or should not be estimated in a P&L. Ian, I hear you, right? That is a common concern that people have. Why should I have to define success in numerical terms? And we don't actually, we've never actually insisted on that. What we've said is you can define success in terms of great big impact terms. So let's say you have a social venture, right? How many people conceivably could be helped? How many units of disease could we conceivably present? So I think people get themselves down a rabbit hole when they say it's got to be a very narrow financial definition of success. Now, if it's really, really, really super early, if it's just an idea, and then you're in the world of what Safi Bahcall very famously calls loom shots. That's where you're doing like basic science. You're saying, do the laws of physics support that? And I agree. You shouldn't be doing a business plan at that stage, but you're not looking to build a business, and you're probably not looking to do venture funding or any of the stuff that comes in entrepreneurship yet. What you're doing there is straight R&D. And I think there what you want is a learning plan. And the learning plan just basically says, here's discoveries I need to make. And when you've made enough discoveries, then it becomes territory for discovery driven planning, where you can start to put some business angles around it. But when it's just a pure scientific exploration, I would agree that this is not the right technique for that. Um, so Andrew wants to know how you include technology uncertainty. So this is a hypothetical project. It's a bracelet that can send an alert in a threatening situation. And if we look at the uncertainties, so these are the internal and external market uncertainties. But if I continue to scroll down, these are the capability and technology uncertainties, right? So we include questions like time it'll take to develop, cost of the equipment, necessary infrastructure, total cost of development. It's quite detailed, and you'll see for this hypothetical product. Which it's a product that already exists. You can just sort of put comments in. Have we done this? What's the cost? This is done. Here maybe it's a more thoughtful comment, what skills we need. So comment by the person doing it, tough labor market, may need new skills. So you can, as the professor, you can scroll down through each of things. Now, if it's not relevant, let's say it's a software thing, you just mark it low uncertainty. That's simple enough. But you can see what the students are working on, right? So here they've said, we think we're highly certain about what organizational structure we've got. They say it's working well. You can decide whether that's enough or not, or whether you want to interrogate it more. So that's how we deal with the technical uncertainties there. Can we sign up for the software to play with it before we commit? Yes. Yeah, we're recruiting kind of beta tester people right now. So we're hoping to be able to make that available for the first few brave souls that are willing to go on this journey with us. But yes. The uncertainty, so Andrew's asking whether the uncertainty questions are standard. Yes, they are. Now the checkpoints and assumptions are completely flexible, as are the strategic scores. Yeah, pretty much everything else in the program can be customized to the needs of your course. The reason we make the uncertainty question standard is just that comes from the research, and it shows that if you leave any of these things out, that you're likely to run into problems. And there are 43 standard ones. So we're nearly at time for this session. What I'd like to suggest as next steps is those of you with an interest, please reach out to Jacora, and perhaps we could put Jacora's contact information in the chat. And she's going to be, setting up the first group of experimenters on the system. And we think we've made a lot of progress, but of course, it's new. So anything new is going to have unexpected things that we hadn't thought about. And we'd love to work with you. I think this is a powerful way to bring this technique into student hands. And the latest thing is, how do we now connect this to Chat GPT? I think this is going to be amazing. So we're busy working on that. So thank you all for coming. Thanks for spending some time with us. This recording will be available if you want to share it with colleagues and socialize it at your various institutions. And I look forward to working with you. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.